Hey everyone, welcome back to Political Science 101, American Government and Politics at Simmons College. I want to thank all of you who have been watching the videos and commenting on them. Please don't forget to comment on this video on YouTube. Let me know you've seen the video, and that is how you get your participation grade and attendance grade for the semester, which is the biggest chunk of your grade. Also, I know a couple of you have emailed me in the last couple days, and I'm sorry I'm behind on my emails, but I haven't forgotten you. And if you have reached out to me with any kind of question or anything, please understand that I will get back with you very soon, and I have not forgotten you. So thank you for being engaged in the class, and if you had questions about something, please understand that I will be getting back to you soon. And with that, let's go ahead and keep rolling along. I want to tell you that from now until I believe it's next Wednesday, February 10th, is the first quiz, the first graded assignment for the semester in this class. And for that, we will be, it'll be covering the things we've, like it says in the syllabus, it'll be the branches of federal government and the levels of government. The branches being the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch, and the levels of government being federal, state, and local. We'll talk more about the levels of government a little bit on Wednesday of this week and a little bit a week from today on next Monday. But for today, I want to talk about the legislative branch and the executive branch of the federal government. Now, I gave you an overview of the branches last week, on last Wednesday, but today I want to get in a little more detail, but again, keep in mind, always keep in mind about what we're talking about. How is this relevant to you? I'm talking about people who work in Washington in big fancy offices, a lot of whom, although they don't get rich working for the government, a lot of them are rich before they get elected. These are people who, for the most part, are elitist. They are not like the rest of us because they typically, they meaning the people that make up the executive branch and the legislative branch and the judicial branch of federal government, they tend to go to fancy colleges and have a bunch of fancy degrees. More often than not, they have some kind of political connections in their families or in their communities. And that's the typical kind of Washington politician. But the decisions they make impact all of us. And not all Washington politicians are like that. Some of them do come from humble beginnings. Some of them financially came from nothing. They weren't all like the previous President Trump, who was born into money. Well, so was President Bush. Both Presidents Bush were born into money. But not everyone. Not everyone, not everyone in politics is like that. It's easy to seem like it if you watch the news and listen to these people talk, to these very overly educated elitists. And so don't forget the decisions they make impact normal people, the rest of us, the middle class, the lower middle class, and people living in poverty. So that's why we have to learn about these people, because the decisions they make impact everyone. With that being said, let's talk about the legislative branch. At the federal level, the legislative branch is Congress. Congress formally meets on a regular basis at the United States Capitol on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., and it's made up of two chambers, the House of Representatives and the United States Senate. Now, I'm hoping all of you heard this in grade school, but you're going to hear it again because it's very important. And also, I don't like the way that they teach this stuff in grade school. They make you memorize facts and dates, and that's not the way to learn how government works. In fact, that's not the way to learn anything. Congress is made of two chambers, the House of Representatives and the Senate. They make legislation. Remember that on last Wednesday's video, I told you that the statute is the second most powerful type of law in the United States. The most powerful law, the supreme law in the United States, is the Constitution. But just beneath that, on that hierarchy of law, are statutes. A statute is a piece of legislation that has been passed by both the House and the Senate, and then signed into law by the President, or vetoed, meaning rejected by the President, the executive, and then Congress can override that veto. But the overwhelming majority of statutes, of those very powerful laws in the history of this country, have been passed by means of passing, it doesn't matter which order, either the House or the Senate passes a bill, a piece of legislation, by a majority vote, but it has to pass both chambers. When it does that, then it goes to the desk of the President. And the President, if he signs the legislation, it becomes a statute, it becomes the law. And only the Constitution can revoke or override a statute once it's been passed by the House and the Senate and signed into law by the President. What is the House and the Senate? What are these things? Well, the House of Representatives is pretty straightforward. Every 10 years, the United States has a census. The census is the government determining the official number of people living in the United States. Those numbers are used to determine representation in the House of Representatives. Now, is the census perfect? Does it count everyone? No, they always miss some people. And there's a very strong argument to be made that the census, the number counting that determines how many representatives we get in the House of Representatives, may not always represent all demographics of people equally. I wish we had time in this semester to get into that, and if we do at the end of the semester, I can. And if you have questions about that, what I mean by that, post them below this video, and I'll try to address it. I will address it in the next few videos. But just know that theoretically, if this stuff all actually worked the way it's supposed to, every 10 years there's a census that gives us the official government calculation of how many people are in the United States. How many people live in Kentucky, how many in Indiana, how many in Tennessee, and then they take those numbers and divvy up the number of members of the House of Representatives. The Constitution, Article 1 of the Constitution. If you want to read that, it's in the appendix to your textbook. You can also just Google United States Constitution, and you'll find the full text of it. I recommend using an official government site, but either way, you'll find that text online if you just Google it. And Article 1, the first substantive part of the Constitution, governs Congress. And it says that there'll be 435 members of the House of Representatives, 435. Take the population of the country and you try to evenly distribute among the states those representatives. Therefore, in the House of Representatives, California has way more members than, say, Kentucky. Why? Because California has like more than 10 times as many people. Is that right? I don't know. California, I don't have populations memorized, but California has tens of millions of people living in it. And Kentucky has 4.4 million people living in it. How about I use something I know a little better, like Tennessee, I believe, has 6 point something million people. Kentucky has 4.4 million people. So Tennessee gets more representatives in the House than Kentucky does. What about the Senate? That's the other one. The United States Senate. The Senate has 100 members. Doesn't matter how many people you have in your state. You get 2 senators. The Constitution says that each state gets 2. We have 100 senators because there are 50 states. If, unlikely but possible, if places that have openly sought to become new states, like D.C., you may know the District of Columbia is not a state, but it is part of the United States. And the people of the District of Columbia it's Washington, D.C., they have formally voted and requested that they be made a state. If that were to happen, there would then be 102 senators, because there'd be 51 states. So every state gets 2 senators. Does that seem right to you? Think about it for a minute. I could spend an entire semester talking about nothing but the origins of the American Congress and how it came to be that the House and Senate exist with the numbers that they have. Americans like to talk about, or especially American academics and American politicians, like to talk about democracy. It's a word, it's rooted in Greek language, and the modern English definition is a representative government, a government by the people. But the United States is not a proper democracy. If it were, then each citizen would get 1 vote, and our votes would count the same. Is that the case? No. You know why? Well, there are a number of historically racist, sexist, xenophobic, and homophobic, and many other reasons why that's the case. But the reason is also there in the Constitution itself. If Kentucky gets 2 senators, and California gets 2 senators, California has tens of millions of citizens. Kentucky has just over 4 million citizens. That means that Kentucky voters, when they go to cast their vote for a United States senator, their vote counts more than a California voter. Think about that. And Kentucky is not the smallest state. Montana has less than 1 million people in the whole state. Montana has fewer people in geographically a huge, look at the map, it's a massive state. A massive, beautiful state full of all sorts of beautiful land, but not that many people. There are fewer people in Montana than there are in the Louisville metropolitan area. But yet, Montana gets 2 senators, and Kentucky gets 2 senators. So when Montana voters go to vote for their senators, their votes count more than Kentucky voters, just like Kentucky's vote for the Senate counts more than California's. Again, I ask you, is that right? Which states are the smallest states by population? I don't have the list in front of me, but I'm pretty sure it would include Montana, Wyoming, North Dakota, South Dakota. Which are the largest states by population? Well, I know those, actually. It's California, Texas, Florida, New York. What do California, Texas, Florida, and New York have in common with each other that they don't have in common with, say, North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, Wyoming? Well, lots of things. But for one, those states with smaller populations are predominantly white. California, Texas, Florida, New York have significant minority populations. Now, the states looked a lot different back when they made this Constitution in the late 1700s, the late 18th century. But race was still a factor in why the Senate is the way it is and why the House is the way it is. The slave-owning states were afraid that the non-slave-owning states, the states, and go back in time a little bit, it's the 1700s, for the most part, not all, but most of the northern states had either abolished slavery or were in the process of trying to get rid of slavery. They're trying. And they would have completely abolished slavery in the northern states. They would make it illegal for residents of those northern states to own slaves not long after the Constitution was passed. But the southern states, from Maryland, Virginia, Kentucky on down, that was where it was very much legal to own slaves. And those states were concerned that the northern states, as their populations continue to rise, the white populations continue to rise, that they would continue to increase their political power because they'd have more votes in the House of Representatives. And so they were like, no, we don't want that. We want some way where the states can have an equal say. One state, one vote. They compromised with this House of Representatives based on population. Senate, 2 for each state. So, sorry, y'all. My dog is he just wants to be in the camera. Hey, buddy, say hi. He just wants to be in the camera. Anyway, that's why if I'm trying to pet my dog, I'm trying to pet him and play with his toy now while I'm talking to y'all. So anyway, it may be unprofessional to be playing with my dog while I'm making this video, but the alternative is letting him run loose in the house and wake up my sleeping 1-year-old baby. So here we are. Anyway, sorry, I'm starting to ramble a bit about this, but it's important that you all know that every state has equal representation in the Senate, and that every state has proportionate representation in the House based on the population of that state. And the roots of that go back to the fear of the slave-owning states, the fear of those state leaders that northern anti-slavery leaders back in the 1700s were going to overpower them in Congress. And so they made sure the Senate would be able to make a check on that as long as there were at least as many slave-owning states as free states. We're going to talk a lot more about that later in the semester, but the important thing to take away from this right now is that the roots of the way our Congress is set up, the roots are in slavery. And in southern states trying to perpetuate slavery. Buddy, want your toy? All right, sit down. Okay. Let's go into the Electoral College. It's a good segue into the executive branch. It may not sound like it, but I promise you it is, because how do we elect a president? I hope that, based on what happened in November of last year, I hope that everyone learned a bit about the Electoral College, because the Electoral College is the reason that one candidate can get more votes than the other one for president and still lose the election. It happened to Hillary Clinton in 2016. It happened to Al Gore in the year 2000. And although this 2020 election, honestly, historically, wasn't even that close compared to other elections, it wasn't that close. But the loser, President Trump, wanted to pretend that it was. He wanted us all to believe that it was a very close election, or either that it was very close or that he won by a lot. And neither of those things were true. But the Electoral College is what decides it. So each state gets so many votes in the Electoral College. 48 of the 50 states determine who gets their electoral votes by who wins the popular vote just within that state. Now, if that seems confusing, it is. If it seems ridiculous, it's also ridiculous. It's silly. But it ensures that although it's not quite like the Senate where every state gets an equal vote, it ensures that every state, the smaller states, have a little bit more weight. Your votes count a little bit more in the smaller population states than they do in the big states. How? Well, how do you think they determine how many Electoral College votes you get? They determine it by adding up your members of Congress. So, Arizona has 8 members of the House of Representatives based on Arizona's population and 2 senators. I'm sorry, 9. I think Arizona has 9 members of the House of Representatives and 2 senators. So Arizona gets 11 votes. Electoral College. Kentucky has 6 members of the House and 2 senators. Kentucky gets 8. Now, if it was 9 for Arizona and 6 votes for Kentucky, that would be roughly proportionate by the populations of the states. But when you add those extra 2, it's like Kentucky gets a slight edge because Arizona and Kentucky both get the extra 2, representing the 2 members of the Senate, even though Arizona's bigger than Kentucky. It's got more people. And although this wasn't explicitly the purpose when the Constitution was made, was written. It's worth noting that Arizona is a more diverse state than Kentucky ethnically, and so it's funny how that plays out today, isn't it? It seems like the ethnically diverse states are always the ones that are getting screwed in the electoral college count. That might just be my opinion, but I can back it up if anybody wants to ask. Okay. President of the United States is chosen by the Electoral College. The electors are chosen by the votes, the popular votes within each state. It's slightly skewed to favor the smaller states. The candidate for president that gets the most Electoral College votes, well, you have to get at least 270. Get at least 270 out of 538, and you win the Electoral College. You win the presidency. Then what? I told you most of what you need to know about the executive branch and the presidency on last Wednesday's video. The president is the commander-in-chief of the armed services, which was not it was a big deal, but it mattered less when the country was founded than it does now. Now that means that person controls the largest nuclear arsenal in the world and by far the most expensive and best funded military, or most funded military in the world. Our military is large, and although the members of the United States military, you could certainly argue they don't get paid enough in salary, the military budget is, it's unparalleled anywhere else in the world. And the president is in charge of the military. The president also has that very important power I mentioned earlier, which is the ability to sign legislation passed by Congress or to reject it. It's called a veto, V-E-T-O, veto. And if the president vetoes a bill, a piece of legislation, it does not become a statute. But Congress has the power to override that veto if 2/3 of Congress vote to do so. All right. What else does the president do? I mentioned executive orders. An executive order is a type of law. Remember, your hierarchy of laws. You got the Constitution, and then you have statutes. Under that are executive orders. The president can issue executive orders, they are laws. Technically just made by one person, but they are laws because the person that makes them is the president. An executive order is a law, but just like statutes shall not violate the Constitution, executive orders shall not violate statutes or the Constitution. Remember, it's a hierarchy. So, the president's commander-in-chief makes executive orders. The president also gets to carry out the budget. Congress passes the federal budget, the president signs the federal budget, and it becomes a statute, and becomes a very important type of law, but the executive branch actually does the stuff in the budget. The budget is split out by federal department. I mentioned before, you got Housing and Urban Development, you got Health and Human Services, you got the Department of Justice, the Department of Defense, that's the big military budget I was talking about. I just said a second ago, I said Health and Human Services. Well, that's Medicare. It's Medicaid. That's a lot of federal money, a lot of taxpayers' dollars that the executive branch is in charge of divvying out. Those are the main things you need to know about the legislative branch and the executive branch, about Congress and the president. But what happens if a statute or an executive order violates the Constitution? In fact, who gets to say? Who gets to determine that? The answer is the judicial branch. And we're going to talk about that Wednesday, 2 days from now. In the meantime, again, I apologize if I hadn't gotten back with some of your emails yet. I will get back to those as soon as possible. And please comment on this video below that you've seen it, that you watched it, and that's how you get your participation grade in the class. Thanks so much, everyone. I want to say goodbye to Theodore. Say bye, buddy. All right. He's sleepy. And so am I. But you all, thank you for watching the video. I hope you and your families are staying safe during the COVID pandemic. I hope you're having a good week so far. And I'll talk to y'all on Wednesday.